Welcome everybody for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get going. So it looks like we've got a relatively small group today. So we can kind of keep it informal. If anybody has any questions as we go along, or if there's some burning questions that you think that you'd like to have answered, feel free to interject and we can answer those as we go. But as Janet said, today we're going to talk about Signs 101. Just kind of give a brief overview of some different things. So we're going to be looking at, why do signs matter? So kind of, what's so important about our signs in maintaining those and making sure that they're safe and properly installed and in the right locations. We'll look at the available guidance for signs. So, if you have questions on what type of sign should be put in, where does it go, how does it go in the ground, what kind of guidance are you going to be looking at for that? We'll look at the location. So, where do we put signs so that they can best serve their purpose? So, they can inform drivers before they or as they need that information going through there. Where can we place those, so it's best for maintenance and best for visibility. And then we'll look into crash-worthy assemblies. So, what all goes into making a signpost and putting that post together to make sure that if somebody does depart the roadway and they run into it, that we cause the least amount of damage as possible. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So we're going to kind of look at, why signs. And if you look at our roadways, this is a picture of a road going along a curve. And if you think about going through here during the daytime, there's a lot of different things that are telling you, hey, this road's curving. You can see the markings on the pavement. You can see that guardrail kind of sweeping along through there. And we're kind of in a mountainous area, so you can see a lot of the vegetation and the topography behind that. So there's a lot of visual indications during the daytime that say, hey, this roadway is moving. Something's happening up here that you might have to adjust your speed. You're going to have to adjust your trajectory and start turning that wheel to go through it. But then imagine if you're in a rural location like this and you're coming through at night. And maybe it's one of those, moonless nights where it's real dark. Maybe it's raining. And what do you see? And if you look at, that picture at night, what you may see is just the signing out there. A lot of times our pavement markings get worn, especially after snowplow season, when you in the springtime and those the retroreflectivity on those pavement markings gets torn away. If you look at what's there in terms of vegetation, they kind of absorb light. You don't really get much reflectivity off of that. So we may just see those signs. That's one of the main things that's really saying, hey, something's happening here on this roadway and we need to slow down or adjust our and turn around this. So signs are very important in making sure that they're properly maintained, that they're not worn, that we don't have any of that sheeting starting to delaminate to where we can still get that good reflectivity off of it. That's what we need to make sure we do with our signing. One other thing, I want to look at, if you look at nighttime crashes versus daytime crashes, based on how many miles we drive, you've got a much higher chance, about 3 times higher chance of getting into a crash at night in these rural areas than we do during the day. And while a lot of factors go into that, you may be tired more at night and things like that, a lot of it is just the visual and visibility of that roadway and the directions that we're giving. And so signs can play a huge factor in making sure that everybody's aware of where they're at on that roadway and what that roadway is doing. One other thing I want to kind of share is this is from Kentucky's Board of Claims cases. And so it looks at anytime somebody goes to the Board of Claims, which is if you have damage, if you get into a crash, if you're trying to sue the state and say we need to claim some damages from an improper roadway, this is the number of those cases over several years. So you can see the least number of cases are for inadequate signs or pavement markings. So 374. The majority of those are from damaged potholes or from pothole damage. And so this is my PSA for those of you who don't know it. If you do hit a pothole on a roadway, on a state road, and you damage your tire, bend a rim, whatever, you can file a claim with the KYTC, and they actually will reimburse you for those expenses. So that's probably our most frequent claim, but you can see that there's a lot of things that go into it. So that's the number of claims. If you look at the highest pay amount, so how much do we pay out for that? Inadequate or improper signs and markings is the number one. So even though you don't have a whole lot of them, remember this is the least number of claims, it's got the highest pay amount, because the dangers and the hazards of having improper or inadequate signs and markings, not providing that direction for those vehicles going down the roadway, that's where we start to see these higher speed, high severity crashes that happen through there. So signs are really important in conveying information that we need to everybody on our roadside. So, that's just kind of set the stage for why are signs important, because they really do help communicate what we're wanting to. So signs provide regulations, warning, and guidance information for road users using a combination of words, symbols, and arrows. And the book you see here, the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD, that is the one book that kind of covers the majority of what we have out there. Make sure that when we put a sign up that says, stop ahead, and you go over the border, say from Kentucky into Indiana, you're going to see that same sign. So we're going to have consistency across states, across cities, no matter whether you're on a local roadway or on a state roadway. So the MUTCD provides that guidance. And that's really one of those regulatory things that this is what you're supposed to do when managing a road agency, to make sure that we have that consistency across the United States and how our traffic control looks and operates within there. So a couple of different guidances that we do have are the MUTCD. It'll tell you when you need signs, what those signs, where they're supposed to be placed at. Some other ones are the standard highway signs, the 2004 edition. That one really tells you, what's it supposed to look like? A lot of the times you might be driving down the road and you'll see somebody has made a speed limit sign. The font looks a little bit different. It might be difficult to read. The colors might be off. And the standard highway signs book tells you what that font is, how thick it's supposed to be, so that we have that consistent messaging, that consistent appearance on all of them. While it's not a big deal, you might think, well, what's it matter if we use a different font size? We're trying to convey information in real time as somebody's driving down the roadway, and just a moment of thinking, that sign looks weird, or what does that say again? Not being able to read it clearly, that can really have an impact on how quickly that information is conveyed. So the standard highway signs book kind of gives you the information you need if you need to make a sign, to make sure that it's consistent with all the rest, and we don't have any additional, say, concerns or just moments where you think, what's going on with that sign? The final book is the Roadside Design Guide, and the Roadside Design Guide gives guidance for everything that you place adjacent to the roadway. So you can see on the cover, you're looking at guardrail, looking at concrete barriers, things like that. But it also includes signing, because we place those signs on the side of the roadway, and we need to make sure that, vehicles do depart the roadway. It could be because you're not paying attention. It could be because you're driving too fast. It could be because a squirrel or a deer jumps out in front of you. So there's a lot of different reasons why we might depart the roadway. And we want to make sure that if somebody does make a minor mistake or does depart that roadway, that when they impact something that we place there, that it is not a fatal or severe crash. So the Roadside Design Guide talks a lot about how we put together these sign posts and where they should be going. And so we'll get into a little bit of that later on as well. So the the next one I want to take a look at is just really quickly, looking at these, does anybody see anything wrong with any of these 4 different sign pictures? Does anybody have an idea of what may be wrong with how we look at these signs, or how they've been placed? Any issues that you might see? Anybody want to take a guess? So a couple of them, we'll just kind of walk through them. One, you see this stop sign here, and they've got the 4-way plaque. And really one of the things that we've changed is going away from that 4-way to an all-way stop. And that's Martha's got the not 4-way, the all-way. And, that's really to convey, what if you have a 5-leg intersection? Does somebody not stop? And so we're going with an all-way so that we know everybody is going to be on the same page, and we're clearly communicating that. Jan said, we got 2 signs on 1 post with the railroad crossing, and this one actually is permitted in the MUTCD, is that you can dual mount a stop sign or a yield sign on the railroad cross bucks. But if you look at the railroad crossing, we've got a lot of fading, and just the general overall maintenance with that one is poor. But this is the one location where you actually can dual mount 2 messages on a single signpost. One of the other ones, if you look down at the bottom right with this curve ahead sign, if you look at the placement, that's really far away from that curve. And so if you think, well, you're driving down the roadway and you see that sign, so I need to slow down, but you go further on down the road and you haven't gotten to that curve yet, you might start to forget about it, or you might be distracted by something else. And so we want to make sure that when we're placing our signs, that they're going to be giving you that information right as you need it, so you can take action upon it. What we don't want to do is give you information too far ahead in advance as you go through there. So just a couple of things that you might see it every day, but there's some just small things that we can change to make sure that we get that consistency through all of them. So next thing we want to talk about is sign location and where we put our signs at. And so there's a couple of different things. We want to make sure that we have our signs to where in a location that they can meet their purpose. If I'm telling somebody to slow down because there's a stop ahead, or slow down because there's a curve ahead, we need to make sure that that sign is in the proper location so that they can convey that message when somebody needs it. We also want to minimize the frequency of collisions. So if somebody does depart the roadway, we don't want to have that sign right on the edge. We don't want to have it so close that people are hitting their mirrors on it and causing damage to the vehicle or damage to the sign, so that they can no longer serve that purpose, or it's no longer readable. And then we want to have a consistent location. So when you're driving down that roadway, you don't want to have to be looking all over the place. Is this sign on the left side of the road? Is it going to be on the right side of the road? Where's that message at? We want to have it on the same side of the roadway at the same distance, so that I can see that sign very clearly and know exactly where I should be looking at for that information. And then one of the most important things that's sometimes overlooked is provide adequate space for maintenance and mowing activities. If you've seen them mowing along the side of the highway, and they've got the large bat wings, which are probably 12 plus feet across, and we've got a sign 3 feet from the edge of that roadway. In order to mow, they've either got to come encroach on the roadway, or they got to mow around that, and then they're going to have to send somebody back out with a weed eater. So, taking into account some of those maintenance activities and understanding, can I put this sign in a location that allows them to mow around it without encroaching on the roadway, or some other considerations that we might have. So when we look at the lateral offset, the guidance says that we typically want them in rural areas 12 feet from the edge of the travel way. We want them 12 feet from the edge of the travel way And if we've got a wide shoulder on that roadway, so greater than 6 feet, then we want it 6 feet from the edge of that shoulder. This gives us, again, that maintenance area so that we can mow around it. And it puts it in that same location. So if somebody does depart that roadway, we've got 12 plus feet to where they're not going to be running immediately into the sign through there. So, you know, between 12 feet from the travelway, or if a wide shoulder, 6 feet. A lot of the times we don't have that kind of space, and so we can actually reduce that area, and we'll talk about that in a second. In rural areas, that's compressed a lot more, and so instead of 12 feet, we start to look at 2 feet from the face of a curb. If you've got a curb in there, 2 feet. And one thing I do want to mention is that this is measured to the outside edge of the sign. It's not measured to the sign post. So a lot of times when we're placing signs, somebody might say, well, I got to be 2 feet off, and that's where they'll place their post. This is to that near edge, because if you have a 18-inch wide sign and then you put your post 2 feet away, you're just a little over a foot away from that. And that's when you start to see somebody with wide mirrors, you could be smacking your sign. And like I said, that causes damage to the vehicle, or we can, impact that sign, cause damage to the sign. So it's not doing the job that it needs to be doing. So again, when we talk edge of the travelway, that's to that white edge line that we've got, and then measuring over here to that near edge of the sign. So minimum 12 feet or 6 feet from a shoulder. You can see here, we're obviously not 12 feet, and there looks like we've got the ability. We could probably pull this sign over a little bit further, because our right of way extends at least to where the utility poles are. But there are going to be locations where we might not have 12 feet of right of way. Probably most of our local roadways don't have 12 feet of right of way. Sometimes we might have topography issues. So, if you look at this location where we've got a steep rock cut really on both sides of the roadway, we can't put that sign 12 feet off the side of the road. So where do we do it? The MUTCD recognizes that we might not be able to achieve that. And so it gives us a couple of options for rural roadways. It says no less than 2 feet. And, so hopefully we can get to that near edge, at least 2 feet from the travelway. If you run into locations where you can achieve that, we might want to start looking at moving that sign into another location where it can be achieved, or trying to find some way in order to get that into a place. And then for urban roadways, we want that offset no less than 1 foot from the face of the curb. And again, we're really just talking about, you can even impact that sign from a vehicle that hasn't departed the roadway and still on there. So, basically as much room as we can, up to that 12 feet, but recognizing that we're not going to have that kind of right of way. We're not going to have that kind of placement option. So we can reduce that to 2 feet in rural areas and then 1 foot in our urban. The next thing that I want to talk about is looking at how high does that sign need to be, and so what we really want to do when we're talking about our vertical position is maximizing the visibility of it. So we want that sign up so the drivers can see it, but we don't want it so far up that, you're having to turn your head. You want to be able to see that sign looking out at the roadway and be able to spot that sign. Sometimes if we put it too far up, that really starts to limit the visibility as you go through there. It gets out of your headlights. So you might not be having that band of your headlights bouncing off of it and showing and providing proper retroreflectivity through there. Also having that sign up if you've got breakaway posts, and we'll see a video of this in a little bit. That breakaway post is actually meant to kind of go over the vehicle. And if you get the signs in a, with a different height, sometimes that actually can enter into the vehicle compartment as well. So we want to try and make sure we don't do that. And then when we get into urban areas, We want to get them high enough up. Everybody's seen, you know, the videos on YouTube or whatever, where somebody walks right into a sign, and we want to make sure that those signs are up so that somebody's not walking and hitting their head on a sign. So within rural areas, what we look at is a minimum of 5 feet. And when we say 5 feet, though, we're talking about from the top of the road edge. So if you most of our roads, if we're in a fill area, you know, the road edge is going to go down, and we want to have 5 feet above that road edge. What that's going to do is you can imagine, you know, if you've got you can imagine, like, let's say we've got a bunch of say weeds or something because we haven't mowed through here. If you start to get a lot of vegetation growth or things like that, you're still going to be able to maintain, you know, a line of sight to that sign. So we want to kind of get it up out of the vegetation growth, make sure that we have good visibility to that sign, but still down close enough to where we're able to see it right in our line of sight. So that's, you know, really what we're looking at for these as we go through there. And I got to figure out how to close off my drawing there. And so measure box vertically from the bottom of the near edge of the pavement. KYTC, they've actually put in a guidance that says no more than 6 feet. So they're saying, you know, 5 feet minimum, no more than 6 feet. The reason they do that is because when they look at signposts, is they're paying per foot of signposts. And so some contractors figured out that they can make a little bit more money if they start putting the signs really far up and using a little bit more posts every time they put one in. So that's why they've got the not to exceed 6 feet on there. When we get into urban areas, that goes up a little bit, and it goes to 7 feet. So you know, minimum of 7 feet above the sidewalk. And this is for those reasons we talked about. If you've got pedestrians walking through there, we don't want anybody coming by and hitting their head on the bottom of the sign. You know, if you got a lot of basketball players, we might have to put that up to 7.5 feet to make sure nobody gets injured. But, you know, 7 feet, and that kind of lets you be able to pass underneath of that. So that's where we've got that. In urban areas, they're going to be up a little bit higher for your pedestrians moving around through there. And that's measured from either the travel way or the sidewalk in those areas. I'm going to change this one real quick. I need to pull my so the one area where we do differ from that is when we start to look at chevron markers. And the reason we'll do that is we'll actually put those chevron markers down, and the chevron markers we'll put at 4 feet. And what that does is it really places those chevrons right in the line of sight of your headlights. And that's going to really increase the retroreflectivity of those, the retroreflectivity of the chevrons, so that as you're driving through, your headlights are bouncing back and going to provide a much better guidance for that driver coming through a curve, and you need to provide that that horizontal alignment guidance. So those will be placed 4 feet. Again, you know, we do have this maintenance concerns, and if we've got curves with chevrons, we need to make sure that we don't have any vegetation growing up and really starting to block those, because it can be difficult as you're coming through there to see those if you start getting covered up by vegetation. And I know everybody's having budget issues and all that, and you know, one of the first things we might start looking to cut back is the frequency of mowing, but on curves and where we've got our sign locations, we really need to be aware that you know, we're keeping those chevrons visible throughout the curves. The next thing we want to look at is sign spacing. And what we need to do is sign spacing is make sure that we're giving the drivers information as they need it and we're not overloading it. So, you kind of see in this picture here, there's a lot of messaging going on, and imagine driving down this roadway and you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go. There's so many different signs, so many different directions and routes. You can kind of overwhelm a driver as you go through there. And so, that's one of those things to where it really can be difficult to where we say, what am I actually supposed to do? And when you have too much information, then we also start, to overwhelm that driver, and you're not giving them the information that they need. So what we can do with sign spacing is make sure we separate out those decisions, separate out that information, so that as you're driving down the roadway, you're only taking in the information that you need. And, if you think about it, as we're doing that, you're driving a vehicle, you're, negotiating curves, intersections, things like that. And we're adding different information. So there's only so much that we can do, when we're driving 50 miles an hour down the roadway. So how do we start to space those out? The MUTCD has some guidance in there as well. This is table 2C-4, and this is for advanced placement of warning signs. So if I'm trying to warn a driver of a curve coming up that you need to slow down for, and what it allows me to do is say, how slow do I need to go? And I can say, well, where do I need to put that advanced warning sign? That's going to give them time to see the sign and then react to it and start to decelerate at a reasonable speed before they get to that condition. So if I've got an advisory speed, say of 30 miles an hour and a 50 mile an hour approach speed, I come over here from my approach speed to my 30 miles an hour, and I would need to put that sign 200 feet in advance of that curve. That gives me adequate time to drive, recognize the sign, and then start to decelerate, at a reasonable level, not slamming on the brakes, but decelerating so that I can get to 30 miles an hour by the time I reach that sign. If I've got a stop ahead sign and maybe I can't see that stop sign up ahead, and, I come up and it says stop sign ahead at 55 miles an hour, I would need to be 325 feet in advance of that, so that I have adequate time to come to a full and complete stop as I get up through there. So that's essentially how you can use this to make sure that you get that advanced warning sign in the right location. So you can see we've got speed reductions, then we've got the stop ahead sign, and then there's also merging lanes. So if I've got a lane that's ending, so my right lane ends in heavy traffic, I need to put that sign really far ahead in advance. So I'm about 1,000 feet in advance. Say this lane's merging, you need to start getting over, especially in heavy traffic. It may take some time to get an adequate gap through there. So you need to start looking now as you're going down the roadway. So this gives us some ideas on how we can place those signs. So here we've got a speed limit posted at 55 miles an hour prior to the curve, and we've got a 20 mile an hour advisory speed. So you can see from that sign, we've got an intersection up here, but this curve really comes all the way around. So a really sharp curve up here. And so how far in advance do we need to put that? We can come back to our table. We've got 55 miles an hour and we're going down to 20. So I come over here to my advisory speed of 20, and I would need to be 225 feet in advance of that. So that's how we can use these signs. Now, sometimes we'll talk in a little bit when we're installing signs, you might hit rock. It might be that 225 feet in advance of this, it might be a driveway. It might be, some topography that doesn't allow you a good placement. And so what we want to do is make sure that if we're going to move that sign location, we need to move it further away. We don't want to reduce that 225 feet when we're trying to find that location, because it wouldn't provide adequate time. At the same time, we need to be cautious that we don't move it too far away that the message becomes meaningless. So if we move, say that curve ahead sign with a speed reduction 1,000 feet away because it's got more visibility or something, that's probably not serving the right. It's not giving you that information when you need it. You pass that sign, you don't see a curve, and you might forget that you need to slow down once you get up close to it. So 225 is the minimum, and we can increase that. Just be careful on how far we increase that as we go. So again, we've got a stop sign up ahead, and this one's at 400 feet. And so what's the minimum distance? If we go back to our table, and 55 miles an hour with a stop condition, so we would be at 325. And you can see this one's at 400 feet. 325 probably would put us somewhere up through here. It could have been, maybe that some of the vegetation or there's an issue in that placement. So this was pulled up about 75 feet. So still pretty reasonable, plus, let's say plus 100 feet or so is pretty reasonable in how far we can start pulling that up. And then you can also see that, they actually double posted these signs. So this is on the left side of the road, but there's a matching one on the right side there as well. So really increase that visibility as you go through there. It could have been, this driveway might have hit that 325, which caused them to pull that sign back through there. One other thing that we kind of run into when we're looking at sign placement on horizontal curves is, a lot of times people might want to, you think we've got a sign, so I'm going to take and I'm going to put my sign and I'm going to put it perpendicular to that curve. And if you think about it, if I'm driving along through here and that sign is perpendicular, it's not facing me. And if I'm trying to get that retroreflectivity, if I'm trying to get those headlights shining back on me, it's probably not in the right position. So what we want to do with the placement of our signs is not put them perpendicular to the road, but we really want to put them perpendicular to where that driver is going to be seeing the sign. So if I've got a driver through here and I want them to see that chevron at this location, I'm going to be putting that sign oriented perpendicular to the approaching traffic, not perpendicular to the roadway. That's one of those common things that you'll often see is say these signs, and you can even see in the manual here, that sign's oriented pretty perpendicular to the roadway. We actually might want to turn those in so it's perpendicular to that approaching traffic. So just one of those things. Some of these small items on how we properly install these and how it's done really go a long way to making sure that they're most effective when we have those out in the field and providing the best information to those. So that's kind of on the placement. So, we've got that lateral offset, we're going to be 12 feet away. We've got a minimum of say 2 feet away off the edge of the roadway. We want to make sure our signs in rural areas are 5 feet above the edge of the road. In urban areas, we're going to be 7 feet so nobody bumps their head. And then we're going to have that sign, facing directly to that approaching traffic. So we got it in there, but we still know that sometimes somebody's going to leave their roadway. No matter how much information we give them, somebody may depart that roadway and that sign might be too close and they're going to hit it. And what we really want to do is make sure that if somebody does do that, it's not going to be a severe crash. It's not going to be something that is truly impacting. And so that's how we design a safe road system. There's been a lot of talk, in transportation safety, and we're saying vision zero, and that we don't want to have any fatalities on our roadway. And so when we get to that, we've got to assume that somebody is going to depart the roadway. Somebody is going to make a mistake when they're driving. I've got 3 boys and I say, I'm not on my cell phone as I'm going through, but I'm distracted because you got 3 kids in the back, and it's hard to beat them all, while you're driving down the roadway. So, or somebody's always telling you a story about something. So with that, understanding that people have these conditions, something may come up and they might be distracted for a second and they can put in a dangerous situation. And so if you depart that roadway, let's make sure that doesn't, that's not a traumatic experience. So that's why we look at crash-worthy signpost assemblies. And if you look at the different types that we've got, is we have some slip bases. Those slip bases are typically mounted into concrete, so they're a good application in urban areas, let's say on sidewalks where we don't have a lot of open ground. And they're designed that when it gets struck, you can see that there's some rubber grommets that are holding those in, and that's just going to slide right off of it. And it's not going to be like hitting a fixed object. In our rural applications, then what we use is an anchor, and then we'll have the post assembly on top of that. And the idea here is that anchor is going to stay set in the ground. And this is a fracture post, so that post will actually break away above the anchor. And so then once it's done, you can just pull the post out and replace it. That's how it's supposed to work. It doesn't always, but really that post should be breaking away as you go through it. So if it's placed properly through proper placement, but then also a crash-worthy design, it's really going to make sure that we can lessen the impact of those errant drivers. When we talk about crash-worthy signposts, sometimes people are like, well, we've been doing this for years and we haven't had any problems. And, it may have been that it hasn't been struck. But when we talk about crash-worthy assemblies, these are assemblies, procedures, and, methods that have been crash tested again and again, so that we know when somebody hits that post, we know how it's going to react. And that's really what we want to do. A lot of times you will see, somebody will come through, and let's say we need to get our sign 7 feet up in the air, and we've got 2 4-foot posts. We see those spliced together. When you start splicing those together, when you start say putting these in with kind of makeshift assemblies, it's not that we're saying it's unsafe, it's saying we have no idea how that's going to react. And when we don't know how it's going to react, that's when we can't really ensure the safety for it. And so what we're going to do is look at an approved and tested assembly that reacts in the same way every time. And so there's 3 different ways that we do that. We have yield posts. The yield posts essentially just bend over in impact. And if you use U-channel posts, those are a yield post. So what it's supposed to do is it doesn't break, it just bends. You hit it, bends right over, and we don't have any issues with that. The next one is the fracture. And KYTC has moved to square tube posts. Those are a fracture post. And so when you hit that, the front end of the post will actually fracture and it'll break and bend over. And we'll see a video of that in a second. The issue with both of these, if they're meant to yield or they're meant to break and snap, sometimes you might get a shipment of posts that aren't the right material. They may be too strong. And so, a lot of times in engineering, you always think, bigger and stronger is better. But what actually can happen is if we get something too strong, it's not going to yield. It's not going to fracture like we intend it to. And that's where we can run into some issues with it as well, because we don't know how it's going to react. It's just a fixed object at that point. And then the other crash-worthy assembly is the slip base. And we saw that earlier, where you've got an anchor joined to that post assembly with a bracket, and that bracket will essentially shear off at the connection point. So I'm going to show a quick video, and this is some of the crash assembly testing that's done. This comes out of TTI and down in Texas, is what you're going to see is you're going to see one fracture post, and you're going to see how that is meant to break away. And then we're going to see another one that is actually a higher tensile strength than's recommended. And we'll see how that differs in its performance when you don't meet those specifications that we've got. So it's kind of in slow motion, but you can see this truck's coming through. He's going to hit this first post. You can see that snaps, breaks away, and goes directly over the vehicle. And then hit this next one, and it performs differently. You know, we have two signs at the exact same height. And what you can see if we back this up, so we'll back it up. We'll look at the first impact. You can see it right at impact, it breaks right as the vehicle hits it. And so you can see right there, there's the position where it struck. That's where that fracture point is. And that sign goes directly overhead of the vehicle. And then when we come further and we hit the next sign, we can see here at impact, see if we can get it queued up here. So here's the impact, and you can see it breaks, it fractures, but it's not actually broken, or it's not separated. It's still connected, and that's what is then pulling that sign down. You can see it pulls it down and into the passenger compartment. You actually see down below here is where it actually fractures and separates from. So you can see that anchor being pulled up out of the ground. And because this didn't have a clean break, then that's going to enter into the vehicle compartment. So, you know, take your choice between both of those. If you're going to be departing the roadway, which would you rather hit? The one that breaks away and goes over your vehicle, or the one that's come in and impacts that windshield, you know, with the potential to even enter into the vehicle compartment? So two different impacts with a signpost, and just a small matter of what the tensile strength of that post is can make a huge difference in the ultimate severity. I was actually doing a road safety audit one time up in Rowan County, and they said, everybody's running off the road here, can you take a look at it? And I said, sure. And I drove through there and ran right off the road, and ended up hitting a sign. Sign broke away exactly like we see in this video, skidded across the top of my roof, and I had a couple of paint scuffs. You know, that's what we want these signposts to do, so that we don't have that injury to the vehicle. So you can see this is the one that failed. And what actually happened is it pulled up out of the ground, and this is the anchor assembly that fractured, as opposed to having that post fracture, and so because it just kind of bent through there. And then you can also see, you know, you can see the impact there to the windshield. Part of that anchor assembly, which we often overlook, especially in local governments, is that you will not see this soil stabilization plate, and that's a key piece to a crashworthy assembly, because what that plate does is it's oriented. If you have your sign facing you, that plate has that flat side that creates more pressure on the against the soil bed to resist that pulling maneuver once it's hit. So the more resistance you can have there, it's going to hold the anchor in place and allow that post to break off. Without it, what you often see is what we saw in that video, is where that post can, well, you can see right here, you can see that post kind of wallowed out. So it started to give way and didn't give that rigid body for the post assembly to break apart. So, you know, standard specification from KYTC is to use a soil plate assembly. That is the crash-worthy assembly that's been tested, and we really encourage all of that. It does a couple of other things too. If you've got wind loading that might kind of shake your sign in sandy soils, or even in clay soils, is what you'll see is that it starts to wallow that hole out as the wind loads on it. And so then you start to have a sign falling over, and the soil plate stabilizer starts to hold that in place and because it gives a little bit more surface area and friction against it as well. So that anchor should really be driven 32 to 34 inches to 36-inch anchor, and then drive it 32 to 34 inches below ground. And what that does is it only leaves 2 to 4 inches then above ground. And that's an important stub height that we want to make sure we don't have too much sticking up out of the ground, because that could catch the underside of that vehicle as it's going through that. Everybody's seen these, cars that are kind of slammed down and lowered to the ground. We don't want to be catching, any piece of that car, because what can actually happen is that can almost be like a fixed object if it catches onto an axle or a piece of the frame of the car if it's sticking too far above, and then either cause a lot of damage or even cause injury crashes as a result of that. So, this is a signpost that has the soil plate assembly, but what you actually see is it's upside down. And so I think if I show you this next picture, this is what the soil plate assembly looks like. The tapered edges here are actually supposed to go on the top. I think a lot of times if you look at that, it looks like a shovel. A shovel, the pointy end goes into the ground first. And so, you'll see a lot of these with that tapered end on the bottom. In terms of performance, it doesn't make a huge difference. But if you think of anybody, say either walking or if it does get impacted with the tire, that sharp edge up top, can catch on to something much more easily than that tapered edge. And if you go from the top of here to the bottom of that taper, that's 4 inches. So that should be in the ground as well, and making sure that you get that proper stub height. So, we recommend 2 inches, no greater than 4 inches, to make sure that we don't snag the vehicle through there. So, you can kind of see this happens quite a bit. In this picture, you can kind of see, these are on a state route. We're signing interstate signs, and it's kind of difficult to see from here, but you kind of see that color change between the two here. And when we go to look closer, we got about a 12 to 17 inch stub height. Not only can those be catch on the bottom of a vehicle, if you think about it, if we've got a 36-inch anchor and you've got 17 inches of that sticking up out of the ground, what that means is you've only got 19 inches and or 19 inches in the ground. So if that happens, if you hit that, you're not going to have all of the resistance to make sure that it doesn't pull up out of the ground. And when we get to that, then that can cause problems as well, and it might not react as well. John, I'm sorry, I just saw your question here from about 20 minutes ago. It says, what if the distance does not fall on a number? Do you bump up or bump down or interpolate? And we're going back to the here. Let me see if I can. Well, here, I'll scroll back here to our advanced placement as soon as I can get to it. And so if we, and I'm not quite sure why they did this, but most of the time, our speed limits are 25, 35, 45, 55, and our advisory speeds, you got 10, 20, 30. Safest thing to do is to round down. I think that's just about anything in engineering. We'd rather provide a little extra safety, factor of safety by rounding down. So if I've got an advisory speed of 15 miles an hour, which would be in between here, we would round down and use the 10. So sorry I missed that question there, John. So that, though, is all we've got in terms of looking at where do we place signs, how high do we place them, and then what's that crash worthy assembly to make sure that If somebody does trick it, we can put it in the exact right location, we can get everything right, but if somebody does end up running into that, what can we do to make sure that it is crash worthy? And looking at those posts, having a proper anchor design and making sure that it's in the ground properly can go a long way towards making sure that it's going to break away and act like it's supposed to. Does anybody have any questions at all on signs or signposts?
While you guys are thinking of questions, I want to thank Adam for joining us this morning and sharing his presentation. And thank you guys as well for taking time to join us.